Henare.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on a bill where I know in the conversations I've had in the many communities I've been a part of, have regularly asked the question about whether or not the current term of Parliament of 3 years is the right length of time. What often is missed in these conversations is whether or not there's any evidence to suggest that, well, 4 years makes the policy decision-making process better. There's always and often a lack of evidence with respect to whether or not an analysis of why New Zealand rejected this same question or very similar question in previous times in the past. And Madam Speaker, if I can capture the sentiment of a previous contribution in the House today that said on this particular bill, that expressed no wonder why New Zealanders have a lack of trust in our democracy and in our democratic institutions. That's why they suspect that this bill will fall over as it progresses through the processes of the House. Well, Madam Speaker, one only needs to look at the number of instances mentioned by my colleague, Mr. Waititi, on why people have lost faith in democratic institutions in this country. Because of the challenges that have been put towards certain sectors of our community, tangata whenua in this instance, but other parts of our community. And that's the challenge that must be debated, must be brought forward in a sensible way, which is why, of course, the due diligence throughout this process is going to be really important. But, you know, if we look towards some of the initial analysis of these particular matters, and as you know, Madam Speaker, the RIS that's tabled here for all of us to read sets out a number of those matters really well. What does this mean for Te Tiriti o Waipangi? What does this look like in terms of the many court judgments that have been passed in this country that have continued to help our democracy evolve and come to a space where, yes, still challenging, but there has been progress. And these are questions that must be asked. They must be put to, not put to a wider perspective on debate that doesn't simply look towards, well, what does a 4-year term mean? Because there are other things in this bill, and the main members on the other side of the House have mentioned it, around the makeup of select committees. What does it mean for the democracy in this House? That's simply saying, or at least putting to the New Zealand public, that if the select committee process changes under a new regime, if you will, or a 4-year regime, does that necessarily mean that we'll get better process and policy, better lawmaking? Well, the evidence just simply doesn't suggest that. To simply try and experiment in the hope that 4 years is the best thing for our country moving forward, and we'll tinker with some of our democratic institutions in order to get that across the line. The evidence just simply does not back that up. And Madam Speaker, there's a reflection I have when I talk with my adult son about this matter, because he's one that says, you should have a 4-year term, Dad. Well, if a government is good enough, and we've seen many examples of both Labour-led and National-led governments that have continued to have a 9-year term in office, that's 3 3-year terms, they've managed to do really well. 2 4-year terms is 8 years. Yet governments have been able to manage to hold on to power for 3 terms. And you know what? For me, that feels about right. Kiwis actually sit back and say, maybe we should go for a bit of change, despite how things might have looked, despite how outcomes might have been for them in their particular community. It was the case in 2017 when Labour came into power. It was the case when National came into power after the Helen Clark administration. And of course, there is the odd rare phoenix, if you will, in this debate, and that was good old Kiwi Keith, who managed to do it for 4 terms in this country. So it's doable if the government is leading the country correctly. We don't need to change legislation to do that. However, I acknowledge that there is a debate to be had about whether or not these things have to change. Because the common view of the public of this place is that it takes 1 year to get your feet under the desk, 1 year to make any change, and then 1 year to campaign to try and get back in for another term. Well, I get why the public are asking the question, and the public should have the opportunity to say that. But we've got to do it in a way that makes, like the question suggested by my colleague here, makes it very clear on what it is the public are set to debate.
Now, just want to ask,
What he said.
did anyone feel an earthquake just then?
No,
Okay.
I'm not. I'm not Wellington though.
No. And Gary's a bit closer to me, probably about equal distance to me as to you.
No, I didn't notice anything.
No, okay, it might have been a phantom feeling. That's all good.
I mean, someone. I mean, you live in an apartment? Because someone might.
Yes, I'm actually on the top floor of a 3-story building. Yes.
I mean, it's quite possible someone might have eaten a burrito and did a giant fart. I mean, I don't know.
The main trunk line goes back past the back of my property, so sometimes I think it's an earthquake and I've just been woken up by a freight train.
Yeah. Oh, yes, I remember that from when I lived in Cambridge Street and Levin. We had the same thing. So I know exactly what you're talking about there, Gary.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or this one, you have 2 freight trains going past each other at line speed as well.
I think it's good that Peeni Henare was bringing it back to the lack of evidence.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What's motivating this if there's no evidence to say this is a good thing that we should be doing?
Shall we hear what Cameron Brewer's got to say?
Thanks for watching. Make sure you're subscribed to our Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, Instagram, TikTok, News Guide, the Order Paper Podcast. YouTube, Twitch, Instagram, TikTok, order paper